Just want to come back to those comments from Stephen Isaacs, who was making the point about Boris Johnson perhaps being one of the big casualties first up here in European politics on the back of the situation we're seeing. And of course, cost of living crisis, some of this exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. And Steve, you were right next to me as I pitched this question to the Prime Minister of Spain, asking whether we get into sort of dicey politics from here with the populists coming back and much harder for governments to hold things together when you have pressures on the hip pocket of average voters. Do you just want to weigh in on that? Because we had a by-election. Clearly there have been missteps by the Prime Minister too when it comes to the handling of COVID with the Partygate allegations, and of course lately now around Chris Pincher with the sexual misconduct allegations as well. Just weigh in on whether you think ultimately here we are looking at a crisis too, really around the cost of living.
We are, but that isn't necessarily Boris Johnson's crisis. That is, as you say, a global crisis. It's Joe Biden's crisis. It's President Erdogan's crisis. It's Monsieur Macron's crisis as well. I absolutely disagree with Stephen Isaac's view, actually, that Boris Johnson was brought down by global events as well. This is not about global. This is about a man who's had an enormous majority at the last general election in 2019, had an enormous majority in Parliament as well, way bigger than any of his predecessors going back years and years and years. So this is very much about an issue which Boris Johnson has brought potentially upon himself. Yes, there is a cost of living crisis. Yes, there is a COVID concern. Yes, there is a war in Ukraine and that as well. But the fact of the matter is, this is Boris Johnson's crisis over integrity rather than any of those other big issues. A man with an 80-seat majority does not lose his position, does not lose his power over those issues going in just a couple of years. What has eroded has happened over issues over integrity. Now let's just go back about how in the recent timeline of how this has happened. 25th of May, that is when this crisis really started new legs, because that is when Sue Gray came up with her findings in the Sue Gray report into those Downing Street parties as well. 6th of June, it was only the 6th of June last month that we saw the confidence vote, which was quite staggering and emboldened the rebels. They got 148 votes against Boris Johnson, way more, triple more than what many people had expected. Boris Johnson got 211 votes in that, let us not forget as well, 59% of the vote. That represented a huge number of government employees within that, 120 government employees, which was basically enough to carry him over the line. 23rd of June, the Wakefield by-election as well, a devastating result for Boris Johnson, as indeed was the Tiverton and Honiton elections as well, where we saw huge majorities, 24,000 vote majorities just eroded to the Liberal Democrats in the southwest of the country and to the Labour Party in Wakefield as well. And then the Chris Pincher affair, which has quite frankly eroded all of those supporters who basically went out time after time and said Boris Johnson is the right man to lead our country. He's got it right on the big issues. He's got it right on COVID. He's got it right on Ukraine support. He's got it right on Brexit. And whether you argue with that or not, that is what his supporters have been saying right up until the last 48 hours when he refused to resign. And then we saw this enormous erosion, Jeff, up to 60 government ministers resigning or having been sacked within the last 48 hours. Quite staggering stuff, Jeff.
Yes, but there has also been a bit of a policy soup, Steve, as well. I mean, the processing of asylum applicants in Rwanda, a policy that had people scratching their heads, the perhaps the rejection of rules around international agreements when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Again, people confused as to how suddenly the UK becomes the bad citizen in this story. And of course, then there have been the U-turns. You know, Rishi Sunak and the government saying there is no way that we will tax the oil companies. And then what happens? We get a super tax on the oil companies. So at times it seems that the government has looked dithering. And when it has come up with policy initiatives, they've been policies that not everybody has thought are necessarily a very good idea. So whilst I agree with you, I think Boris Johnson has to take a lot of responsibility for self-inflicted injuries. I think back to Tobias Ellwood's point when we did that interview earlier with the MP, maybe this is a government that is just running out of ideas, and it's time perhaps that they went to the country rather than to the Conservative Party when it comes to what the future of politics should look like in the UK.